first rays of dawn stretched across the Texas plains, casting soft golden light over a quiet field still soaked from last night's rain. In the middle of the muddy ground lay a horse, barely more than skin and bones, motionless, except for the faint rise and fall of its breathing. A group of veterinarians and a few locals stood nearby in solemn silence, their eyes fixed on the frail creature. His eyes, dull and tired, barely blinked. "He won't make it," one of the older vets said with a shake of his head, his voice laced with certainty and fatigue. Another vet, younger and more hesitant, flipped through a clipboard and spoke softly, as if the words themselves carried weight. "Even if we tried, the odds are almost zero. He's too far gone. The infections are severe. Euthanasia would be the most humane thing we can do." The small crowd murmured in reluctant agreement. It seemed like the horse's story would end right there, in that cold, wet field with nothing but quiet resignation to mark his final moments. But then came the sound of steady footsteps crunching through the gravel. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a wide-brimmed hat, walked toward the group. His boots were worn, jeans stained from years of hard work, and his face carried the weathered lines of someone who'd lived through storms, both literal and personal. This was John Carter, a rancher known in the area for handling tough cases horses that others had given up on. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, staring at the fallen animal. Then, without a word, he took off his hat, stepped closer, and knelt in the mud beside the horse. He ran his hand slowly along the thin, shaking neck, feeling the shallow breath beneath his palm. For a moment, the horse tried to lift his head but couldn't hold it up. That small effort, weak as it was, seemed to say, "I'm still here." John's voice cut through the silence, low but steady. "You've given up," he said, glancing at the group behind him, "but I haven't." There was a pause, like the whole field held its breath. One of the vets stepped forward, clearly concerned. "John, with all due respect, this horse has no future. Even if he survives, he'll never be strong again." But John didn't flinch. "If he still wants to fight," he said, standing up and brushing mud from his knees, "then so do I." Spirit, that was the horse's name, had been rescued by a local animal organization just days before. They found him locked in a collapsed stable, starved, dehydrated, and covered in untreated wounds. No one knew how long he had been there, but it was clear he had been abandoned and left to die. He had once been a proud thoroughbred, they said, strong and beautiful. Now he looked like a ghost of that animal, barely clinging to life. But John didn't see a lost cause. As he drove Spirit back to his ranch in his old rattling truck, he looked into the rearview mirror and saw the horse curled up in the trailer, silent and still. "You're going to fight, Spirit," he muttered under his breath, voice heavy with both hope and sadness. "And I'm going to fight with you." In that moment, it wasn't just about saving a horse. It was about believing in something when no one else would. And sometimes belief is the first and most powerful step toward healing. As John Carter guided his old pickup truck along the bumpy country road, the trailer behind him swayed gently with each dip and rise in the dirt path. Inside it, Spirit lay quietly, too weak to stand, his breathing shallow and uncertain. The only sounds in the cab were the hum of the engine and the occasional creak of the wooden frame. John kept one hand on the wheel and glanced at the rearview mirror, his eyes landing on the faint outline of the broken horse through the slats. "You're not alone anymore, boy," he whispered, more to himself than to Spirit. But behind that simple sentence was a flood of emotion that he rarely let show. It wasn't the first time he'd seen a horse this close to death. And it wasn't the first time he felt the pull of something deeper, something he couldn't explain. As the morning sun peeked over the horizon, John's mind drifted back to a different time, a different horse, and a girl with a smile that could light up any barn. Years ago, John had stood in a similar stall with his daughter, Emily, a spirited young girl who had a gift with animals that amazed everyone around her. She could calm the most frightened foal with a whisper, could read their eyes the way others read books. One day, they'd come across a lost colt, abandoned on the side of the highway. Most folks thought it was too late for that one too, but Emily had insisted they take him in. "He's scared, Daddy, not broken," she'd said, brushing the dirt from the little horse's face. And so they had. Together, they spent weeks nursing him back to health feeding, cleaning, staying up through the night to keep him company. John had never seen her happier than when that colt finally stood on his own. She named him Lucky, and the name stuck. That summer had been one of the best in John's memory. Then came the accident, the kind that splits time in half before and after. Emily was gone in a blink, Nothing could have prepared John for that emptiness. He buried himself in work, trying to outrun the grief, but it never truly left. It sat there quietly, like a shadow on his porch. And now, with Spirit lying fragile in the back of his trailer, those memories came rushing back like a tidal wave he couldn't stop. Bringing Spirit home wasn't just about rescuing another horse. It was a way for John to feel close to Emily again. In the broken body of this animal, he saw not just pain but potential, a second chance. And in offering that chance, maybe he could heal something in himself, too. When he pulled into the ranch, Tommy was already outside, squinting into the sun. "What did you bring this time?" he asked, his voice half joking, half concerned. "A lost cause, according to everyone," John replied with a small, almost defiant smile. Together they unloaded Spirit, carefully guiding him into a clean stall lined with fresh hay. The horse moved slowly, uncertainly, but he moved. That, to John, was enough. As the barn door closed behind them, the air was filled with silence, not heavy, not sad, but expectant. Something new was beginning here. Spirit lay down with effort, his body still trembling, but his eyes followed John's every move. Maybe it was just instinct. Maybe it was more. But in that quiet barn, lit by soft morning light filtering through the cracks in the wood, a connection had been made. And though Spirit couldn't speak, John felt the message clearly: "I'm still here. Don't give up on me." The first few days at the ranch were slow and uncertain. Spirit barely moved, often just lying in the hay with his head resting on the ground, his eyes distant. John came into the barn every morning at sunrise, a bucket of carefully mixed feed in one hand and medication in the other. He knelt beside the horse, speaking softly as he worked, not expecting a response, but somehow needing to be heard. "We'll take it one step at a time," he said on more than one occasion, as he gently stroked Spirit's neck. The stall was quiet except for the soft rustling of hay and the occasional creak of old wooden beams. The bond between man and horse wasn't instant, but it started there in silence, in patience, in presence. Spirit didn't eat much at first. He would sniff the food, then turn his head away. But John didn't push him. He sat nearby, sometimes talking about the weather, other times just sitting in the stillness, letting Spirit know he wasn't alone. Slowly, the horse began to trust him, taking small bites of food, shifting his weight, responding to the calm presence beside him. Each day brought tiny signs of progress. Spirit began standing for a few minutes at a time, then a little longer. His body still trembled with the effort, but his eyes were clearer, more alert. John adjusted the feeding schedule, added supplements recommended by the vet, and cleaned the wounds with practiced care. Tommy, watching all this unfold, was both impressed and puzzled. "Why do you care so much?" he asked one afternoon as he helped clean the hooves of another horse in the next stall. "There are healthier ones, stronger ones, ones that can actually work." John didn't look up. "Because no one else will," he said simply. And because it's the right thing to do, that was all the explanation he needed. The days passed in rhythm feedings, cleanings, short walks around the stall, rest. In the evenings, John and Tommy would sit on the porch of the main house, coffee in hand, watching the sky change colors. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. But something had shifted in their conversations, a quiet understanding growing between them. It wasn't just about saving a horse. It was about fighting for something that everyone else had already counted out. Then one morning, something happened that made John's breath catch. As he walked into the barn with a fresh bucket of feed, he stopped in his tracks. Spirit was standing, not because someone helped him up, not leaning against the wall, but fully on his own, head raised, legs shaky but holding. The horse looked directly at him, and for a moment, neither of them moved. It wasn't just a physical achievement, it was a declaration. "Look who decided to step up," John said quietly, a rare smile spreading across his face. He walked slowly toward the horse, not wanting to startle him, and placed the bucket down nearby. Spirit drank, not frantically, but with steady gulps. Tommy walked in a minute later and froze at the sight. "He's getting stronger," he said, almost in disbelief. John nodded, eyes still on Spirit. "Yeah, but we've still got a long road ahead." From that day on, the progress became more visible. Spirit started walking around the corral under John's careful supervision. The first steps were cautious, hesitant, but each day he moved a little farther, a little steadier. The change wasn't just in his body, it was in his spirit. The horse who once lay motionless in the mud now moved with purpose, his ears flicking at sounds, his eyes tracking movement around him. And for John, Every step Spirit took was a reminder that healing, no matter how slow, was always possible as long as someone believed it was. Spirit's recovery was far from easy, and the closer he got to standing on his own, the more challenges began to show up, some visible, others hidden deep beneath the surface. At first, the most pressing obstacle was his health. Though he had made real progress, his body was still fragile, and every bit of movement came with a risk. Then came the unexpected call from the rescue organization. John had just finished feeding Spirit when the phone rang in the kitchen. The voice on the other end was blunt. A representative from the group that had first found Spirit. "John, we need to talk," the man said. There was no warmth in his tone. The conversation quickly turned into something more troubling than John expected. Apparently, a local group of breeders had begun pressuring the organization, claiming that too many resources were being poured into saving a horse that would never be useful. The man's words were cutting. "He's not a working horse anymore. He won't race, won't carry loads. There are others who need help too. We can't justify continuing support for him." John's jaw clenched, but his voice stayed calm. "I already took full responsibility for him." "Yes," the man replied. "But that's not enough." When the call ended, John stood in silence for a long moment, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. He knew right then. The fight to save Spirit wasn't just physical, it was political, practical, and deeply personal. Later that evening, John stood by the fence, staring at Spirit, who paced gently inside the pen, unaware of the new threat hanging over him. Tommy walked over, coffee in hand, and leaned on the post beside him. "You look like you got hit by a truck," he said, trying to break the tension. John didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "They think he's not worth it. That everything we're doing is a waste." Tommy's eyebrows furrowed. "But they've seen how far he's come, right? I mean, you've done more for that horse than most would for their own damn family." John gave a tired half smile. "They're looking at numbers, not lives." His voice turned quieter. "It's not just about whether Spirit will ever carry a saddle. It's about the fact that he's still here, still fighting." That night, the weight of it all sank deep into John's chest. Doubt crept in for the first time. What if they were right? What if he was holding on to something that couldn't last? The next few days seemed harder. Spirit began limping during his walks. A vet visit confirmed an old leg injury had flared up again. "He needs full rest for a while," the vet said. And even then, it might become chronic. The stall that had once been a place of quiet recovery now felt like a cage. Spirit grew restless, refusing to eat some nights, pacing in circles, snorting softly as if sensing the unease in the air. And John, he was running on empty, working late into the night, mixing meds, cleaning wounds, all while a storm tapped constantly at the windows outside. Tommy found him one night hunched over in the barn, hands shaking as he measured out Spirit's anti-inflammatory. "You need sleep," Tommy said gently. John didn't even look up. "If I give up, there's no one left to fight for him." Tommy stood there a while before replying, "Yeah, but who's fighting for you?" It all came to a head one particularly cold and rainy evening. Spirit was lying down, not moving much, just breathing slow and steady. John sat down beside him, his back against the wooden wall, mud still on his boots, jacket soaked through. He didn't speak at first, just rested his hand on Spirit's neck. After a long pause, he whispered, "If you've had enough, I'll understand. I won't force you through more pain. But if there's still some fight in you, I swear I won't let go. Not now. Not ever." Spirit didn't lift his head, but he shifted just enough to press his muzzle gently against John's hand. A small gesture, but one that sent a wave of quiet emotion through the tired rancher. The next morning, John made a decision. He called the rescue organization back. "He's made more progress than any of you expected. If you still need proof, come see him for yourself." The man on the other end agreed, but warned that an inspection would be coming and the decision would be final. As John hung up the phone, the barn seemed colder, quieter, heavier. He turned to Tommy and said, "We've got work to do." The days leading up to the inspection were intense. Every movement mattered. Every step Spirit took could be a reason to stay or to go. And while the pressure built around them, John reminded himself why he started this journey. Not to prove someone wrong, not to win, but because this life, Spirit's life, deserved the chance to keep going, even if no one else saw it. The morning of the inspection arrived with a heavy gray sky stretched over the fields like a warning. The wind rolled through the tall grass, bending it gently, and the air held that eerie stillness that always comes before something important John stood by the barn with Tommy, making final checks on Spirit's pen. The horse stood inside, calm but alert, his eyes tracking their every move. "They'll be looking for any excuse," Tommy muttered, tying off a gate. "Think we're ready." John didn't answer right away. He looked at Spirit, who had been walking better in recent days, though the injured leg still showed weakness. But there was something in the way Spirit stood now, head a little higher, eyes clearer, body steady. "Doesn't matter what they say," John finally replied, adjusting his hat. "What matters is what he shows." The sound of an engine pulling up the gravel driveway broke the quiet. 3 people stepped out of a black SUV, a man in a stiff gray suit, a woman with a clipboard, and a veterinarian with a neutral expression. They greeted John with formality, no warmth, and quickly got to work. John led them toward the pen where Spirit had begun pacing lightly, his movements cautious but full of intention. "There he is," John said. "If you want to see progress, start here." The vet stepped forward, began checking Spirit's body, noting muscle tone, responsiveness, and gait. The woman took notes, her eyes flicking between the horse and her clipboard. But the man in the suit stood back, arms crossed, clearly skeptical. "He still looks fragile," he said, almost to himself. "Not sure I see enough to justify all this." John took a breath and stepped closer. "You weren't here 2 months ago," he said firmly. "This horse couldn't even lift his head. Every breath was a battle. And I was there for every second of it." The man didn't respond, but Spirit, almost as if feeling the moment, trotted lightly across the pen, stopping and lifting his head high. It wasn't perfect, his legs still bore weight unevenly, but it was movement, control, pride. "Can we try a short walk outside the pen?" the woman asked. The vet hesitated, then nodded. "As long as it's slow." John entered the pen and clipped a lead rope to Spirit's halter. He paused, looking into the horse's eyes. "Let's show them," he whispered. Spirit took his first step hesitantly, but found rhythm quickly, moving with surprising steadiness. Around the barn they walked, the inspector silent the whole way. When they returned, the vet finally spoke. "He's stronger than expected." "Still a long way to go, but the improvement is clear." The woman nodded in agreement, but the man in the suit still wore a doubtful frown. "He'll never be a workhorse or competitor, so what's the point?" John didn't flinch. "It's not about what he can do for us," he said. "It's about what he deserves. He was thrown away, left to die, and yet he kept fighting. That means something." A heavy silence followed, but something in John's voice, his certainty, his sincerity seemed to land. Finally, the woman with the clipboard spoke. "We'll include our recommendation in the report. But for now, he stays." As the inspectors returned to their car, John let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He looked over at Spirit, who was now calmly standing in the sun-dappled grass. Tommy approached, his face breaking into a grin. "I can't believe we did it." John shook his head. "He did the hard part," he said, stroking Spirit's neck. "We were just there to help him stand." Overhead, the clouds began to part, soft rays of light spilling over the field. For the first time in a long while, hope felt like something solid beneath their feet. The weeks after the inspection brought a new energy to the ranch. Spirit, once too weak to even lift his head, now walked through the fields with a slow but steady rhythm. His movements were cautious. His legs still carried the memory of injury, but he moved with intention. John built a new exercise routine, one focused on small victories. Short walks in the paddock, time spent grazing in the morning sun, carefully monitored trots. Tommy began joining in more often, not just out of obligation, but because he genuinely wanted to be there. "He's not just recovering," Tommy said one afternoon, leaning on the fence and watching Spirit nibble grass. "He's changing everything." And he was right. There was a quiet shift happening not just in the horse, but in the ranch itself. The air felt lighter. The days no longer dragged with the weight of uncertainty. Even the other horses seemed more alert, as if feeding off the determination that now lingered in every corner of the barn. Spirit had become more than a rescue. He was a reminder of what patience, grit, and belief could bring to life. One sunny morning, John decided it was time. He opened the gate to one of the larger pastures and let Spirit explore on his own. The horse stood still at first, blinking at the wide open space in front of him. Then, almost like a switch had flipped, he began to move slowly at first, then faster, until he broke into a full gallop. His stride wasn't perfect, his legs still stiff in spots, but there was power in it, freedom. John stood with Tommy at the fence, hands resting on the rail, eyes fixed on the running horse. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. That moment, watching Spirit tear across the grass with wind whipping through his mane and sunlight bouncing off his coat, it said everything. "Think he'll stop?" Tommy asked, chuckling softly. John smiled for real this time, one of the rare ones that made it all the way to his eyes. "Not until he wants to." When Spirit finally slowed and came trotting back, chest heaving, eyes wide and bright, John walked toward him and rested a hand on his neck. "You deserve this," he said simply. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like something had come full circle. The pain, the struggle, the loss, they hadn't disappeared, but they had been given a new shape, one that made room for healing. Word spread. Local schools began sending small groups of kids out to visit the ranch as part of a community program. At first, John was reluctant. He didn't see himself as someone who belonged in front of crowds, let alone children. But Tommy encouraged him, and Spirit did the rest. One afternoon, a little girl pointed at the scars on Spirit's flank and asked what happened to him. John knelt down beside her and told the story not just of Spirit's injuries, but of how he refused to give up. He didn't sugarcoat it. He spoke with honesty, the same way he always had. Sometimes, he said, life knocks you down so hard you think you'll never get up again. But if you've got even a little strength left, just enough to lift your head, that's all it takes to start the fight. The kids listened in silence. And in that moment, John realized that Spirit wasn't just healing himself anymore, he was helping others too. He had become a living symbol of resilience, one scarred but standing, one that didn't need to be perfect to be powerful. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all. Because this story, Spirit's story, isn't just about a horse that was saved. It's about what happens when someone chooses to believe in the impossible. It's about showing up when no one else will. In a world that often moves too fast and discards what's broken, Spirit reminds us that healing takes time and that worth isn't measured by usefulness. It's measured by courage. Maybe we all have a little bit of Spirit in us, parts that have been forgotten, bruised, or written off. And maybe, like John, we just need someone or something to show us that there's still fight left in us. So the next time life feels too heavy, remember this: a horse that couldn't stand now runs through open fields. Not because he was perfect, but because someone chose to believe he was still worth saving.